Our co-main event of the evening. This has been a contentious one. We have Bryan Barberena, a real man at welterweight, take on Rafael dos Anjos, the former champ at 155. And for dos Anjos, we touched on it with Clay Guida. We touched on it with Darren Elkins. Like, there's guys that have their names in the rafters, so to speak, because of the records that they possess in the UFC. But if you look at it for RDA, he will most likely, unless we get a really quick finish, break Frankie Edgar's Ironman streak. And I know Edgar just retired, but RDA is sitting at 7 hours, 53 minutes, and 29 seconds of cage time in the UFC's Octagon. Frankie Edgar, 7 hours, 57 minutes, and 10 seconds. So what is it? Just a little under 4 minutes. So if it goes over that, RDA is going to be able to break that record. He's truly 1-1 in Orlando, and if he gets to win this weekend, he'll be on 75% of all the Orlando cards. He lost to Khabib, and he was able to beat Donald Cerrone. He had beaten Pettis for the belt. He beat Cerrone to retain, and then he lost to Eddie Alvarez after that. But if you do look at it for RDA, just his last 2 fights, he got knocked out in the 5th round of his fight against Fiziev earlier on this year. He beat the Call of Duty god, Renato Moicano.
Great fight.
And that was a great fight on short notice at a catch weight of 160 pounds. So for dos Anjos, making the move up to 170 pounds, I wonder how he's going to fare. Coming off that knockout loss against a guy in Bryan Barberena who's on a Legend Killer tour.
I'll be honest, I don't really like the move up to 170, and I will say why. And I'm going to contradict myself a couple of times, but I do have examples to defend my own point. RDA's not a good wrestler at 170.
He was against Robbie Lawler.
He didn't take him down that much in that fight. He struck with him a lot. He boxed him. He stood on the outside. He used his striking in that fight. The only guy he's wrestled at 170 is Kevin Lee, who was a blown-up 155er himself. But the weird thing is, the way for RDA to have the most success in this fight is by using his wrestling. But that's the weird thing about RDA in a lot of his matchups. It comes down to the physicality factor of RDA. If he's the bigger guy, he's going to be able to out-wrestle his opponent. Think of Renato Moicano. Again, that fight wasn't contested at 155. It wasn't contested at 170. It was one of those weird catch weights that the UFC is all of a sudden willing to do. But the thing is, if RDA is going to have success in this fight, I don't think he's going to get into one of those crazy barn burners like he did against Renato Moicano. We saw Bryan Barberena just get into one of those with Robbie Lawler, and I know Lawler is past his prime. That's why I picked Barberena in that matchup. But still, Barberena can bang on the outside. Like, he is a really good action fighter, and I know that's a very specific class of fighter, and it's not a fighter that you ever think is going to become a ranked fighter. But still, Barberena, I think, is going to be a very tough test for RDA, because again, if RDA is going to have a lot of success, if Jason Witt can out-wrestle Bryan Barberena, you would think RDA can too. But the thing is, Jason Witt is so much bigger than RDA, it's not even funny. And that's why I do think the physicality, sorry, is really going to be important between these two guys.
Well, and there's a couple of things about this fight, and I just realized I made a mistake on the graphic there, because I have RDA 156 with a star. The star being, I guess that's not a mistake, the star being his last fight was at lightweight, this one is at welterweight, so that's why I put it there. But if you do look at it for dos Anjos, the last fight against Fiziev, the scorecards, if there were scorecards, one had at 38-38, one had at 39-38, or 37, one had at 39-37. So he was on his way to losing a decision in that fight before he did get finished. That was back in July, and he only went 2 of 16 for his takedowns against Fiziev. And you'd think if somebody's going to beat Fiziev, it's got to be with some of those takedowns. But for Barberena, since his UFC debut in 2014, he went 2-0 over the Ellenbergers. He's 9-6 overall. But you look at the 5 fight of the nights that he has, and this is why this could be a fight of the night. One against Chad Laprise, one against Luque, one against Witt, one against Brown, one against Lawler. And the fights that he's had, the Brown fight, the Lawler fight, those are big wins. He's won 3 in a row. The other fight in there, it was the UFC debut of one Darian Weeks, a guy who had a little bit of success in the wrestling, a little bit of success with the hands, but ultimately it was Barberena getting the win. But again, he was at a wrestling disadvantage against Witt and against Brown, and he was able to get the win over both those guys. Although I know that fight against Matt Brown was a little contentious because he was a hometown guy in that one.
No, if we just talk about skills, like Allen Iverson was talking about practice, RDA's by far the more skilled fighter. He has more volume. He doesn't have more power, I wouldn't say. Like, he does have good pop to his shot, but Bryan Barberena puts a lot behind his punches, so I would say he has a bit of an edge in punching power, but they're close. I don't think either one of them is an outlier compared to the other. Again, I just keep on going back to the fact, RDA doesn't wrestle at this weight class a lot. He struggles wrestling guys at 170.
Like Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington?
Michael Chiesa was a 155er, and he mopped the floor with RDA in the grappling.
He looked good against Neil Magny.
Neil Magny struggles wrestling against everybody. My point is, RDA has only looked good wrestling against people who really struggle with it at this weight class, or who aren't physically have an advantage over him. I don't think he's going to have physical advantages over Bryan Barberena. We saw the odds while we were looking at another fight, and I know RDA is a 5-1 favorite right now. I haven't seen it. That is absolutely insane to me.
Because RDA open minus 325, minus 566, and Barberena open plus 275, plus 404.
This is what I mean. If RDA, and this is why I snapped a bit when you had said he wrestled Lawler. If Bryan Barberena fights like Robbie Lawler did, he's going to have a lot of success. Like, Bryan Barberena, if they get into one of those firefights, is going to look like Renato Moicano did in the 5th round against Rafael dos Anjos, because he's that much bigger naturally. He's going to hit with that much more pop in his shots. I just don't know if he's going to be able to defend the takedowns from RDA, because RDA is going to be dedicated to the wrestling. I think that's going to be the one thing about him in this game plan. I think RDA at least realizes that, okay, this is a dangerous guy to stand in the pocket with, to really exchange and brawl with. So I do think we are going to see a very grapple-heavy RDA, but that's why this is such a one way or another fight. It's either RDA has a ton of success with his grappling, or he gets a couple takedown attempts defended. We see Bryan Barberena start to land a body kick maybe that starts to bring RDA back down to earth. I just think this is a really difficult fight to predict, especially based on where the odds are.
Well, have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. I'm going to say over-under, because, I mean, RDA is a giant favorite. I'm going to say over-under 80% RDA. They're probably going to be way over.
I think they'll be over, but I definitely don't look at this fight that way.
Slightly over. 2,061 total votes, 82% RDA, 73% by decision for the 18% that are Barberena, 52% by knockout, 40% by decision. Let us know in the chat and in the comments who you have in this one, because, again, it is a tough fight. If you look at Barberena, look at his fight against Matt Brown. Despite the takedowns, he's landing power, and he's landing a lot of good shots. Same thing against Witt. And Witt, I don't care if it's his UFC debut. I think higher of him than most people do. I thought he had a competitive fight against Ian Machado Gary. But for Barberena, it was the compounding of the heavier strikes. His fight against Robbie Lawler, like, he was on cloud 9 his last time out. He looked really good. And, again, Lawler was coming off that Nick Diaz win. But if you look at it for Dos Anjos, he's 38. He's about to break Frankie Edgar's Ironman streak. You got a lot of miles in the cage if you've been in there for over 7 hours. So it's going to be an interesting one. Andy's talking about RDA's short legs. Going to have to get close and land them. And he's going to pay for it. So we'll see how it plays out that way. What's your pick here?
I think I've thrown up enough red tape to say that Bryan Barberena is definitely a live dog. I think he's going to make this fight very entertaining for as long as it lasts, because that's the thing about Barberena. Even if you do take him down, he's going to waste every ounce of energy trying to get back up to his feet. There's some fighters, like, I have some friends who don't follow the sport all that closely, and they think, because Chael Sonnen said this a few times, you only lose by rear naked choke if you give up. And to sometimes that can be true. You see guys, they just can't get up from the ground. It's kind of that deep water situation. Barberena's not that guy. Barberena's going to fight and give everything he possibly can in this matchup, and that's why I think it's a very difficult fight for RDA, because he's going to be the smaller man, but I think his wrestling will end up winning out. I think the pressure that he employs with his striking is going to help open up his wrestling attack.
We'll see how it plays out for RDA in this fight. I look back at it's probably I should, but that Witt fight, and it scares me a little bit for Barberena, but we'll see if the physicality from Witt compared to Dos Anjos plays out that way. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a really fun co-main event. It's going to go one way or the other. It's going to have you on the edge of your seat.